Chosen one, listen carefully. This message isn't an accident. God is preparing something you never saw coming. Chosen one, listen carefully, because this is where the deeper truth begins. Before you ever explain yourself, before you tell someone what you feel, before you reveal what is happening inside your mind, your body has already communicated something. Your posture, your eyes, the way you enter a room, the way you respond to someone's presence, even the tension you carry in your shoulders, these things speak. And the fascinating part is that most of the time, you are not consciously controlling that language. Human beings are constantly interpreting one another. We look at a face and make assumptions. We notice confidence or insecurity. We recognize warmth, distance, fear, excitement, discomfort, attraction, or hesitation. Psychology tells us that perception is not simply about what we see. It is about what our minds believe what we see means. And that distinction is incredibly important. Because someone can look at you and see one story, while another person looks at the exact same you and sees something completely different. One person may see confidence, another may call it arrogance. One person may see independence, another may interpret it as emotional distance. One person may see that you have changed, another may simply notice that you no longer behave the way you used to. This is why you have to be careful about allowing other people's interpretations to become your identity. There may be someone talking about your appearance right now. Maybe they are comparing you to another person. Maybe they are describing the way you look, the way you carry yourself, or the changes they have noticed in you. And perhaps they are telling that story to someone else as though their interpretation were an objective fact. But it isn't. It is a perception. And perception is powerful because people rarely respond to reality directly. They respond to the meaning they assign to reality. Think about that. The same expression on your face can make one person curious and another person uncomfortable. The same silence can be interpreted as wisdom by one individual and weakness by another. The same physical transformation can be viewed as attractive by one person and strange by someone else. So when somebody says, "You look like this," or "You remind me of that person," don't immediately surrender your self-image to their words. Ask a better question. What does this person's interpretation reveal about them? Because sometimes people describe others according to the lens through which they see the world. A person who constantly compares may be deeply invested in comparison. A person obsessed with appearance may place excessive value on appearance. Someone who searches for flaws may have trained their mind to find flaws everywhere. And then there is the person who truly knows you. That person doesn't just see your face. They notice your emotional state. They notice when your confidence has changed. They recognize the difference between the smile you give everyone and the smile that appears when you feel genuinely safe. They notice what happens to your energy when you walk into a room. That is why physical presence can become meaningful in relationships. Your body doesn't merely represent how you look. It can reflect experiences, emotions, habits, confidence, stress, growth, and transformation. But here is where maturity begins. You learn to listen to what your body communicates without becoming obsessed with how other people judge it. Your body is not an advertisement designed to satisfy the world's expectations. It is the physical expression of a life you are still living. And if you have changed, perhaps that change deserves curiosity rather than criticism. Maybe you're becoming more confident. Maybe you're becoming more peaceful. Maybe you've survived something that changed the way you carry yourself. Maybe you're finally becoming comfortable with the person you were always meant to become. So don't panic because somebody has created a story about your appearance. Don't chase every rumor. Don't spend your life correcting every perception. Stand still long enough to understand yourself. Because when you know who you are, other people's descriptions become opinions, not definitions. And that is the shift. Stop asking the world what you look like and start becoming someone you are proud to be. And this is where the conversation becomes much deeper, because attraction is easy to misunderstand. We live in a culture that constantly teaches us to evaluate people through surfaces. We notice a face, a body, clothing, age, style, and physical presence, and then we immediately begin creating a story. But genuine connection operates on an entirely different level. The person who truly understands you doesn't simply see what you look like. They notice what exists underneath what you look like. They notice your character. They notice your emotional patterns. They notice how you treat people when nobody is watching. They notice how you respond when you're disappointed, how you behave when you're afraid, and whether your kindness disappears when you have nothing to gain. That is why a deep soulmate connection cannot be reduced to physical attraction. Physical attraction may open the door, but character determines whether someone wants to remain in the room. Think about the difference between being admired and being known. Being admired means someone sees qualities they like. Being known means someone has taken the time to understand the person behind those qualities, and those are completely different experiences. Someone might tell you that you're beautiful, attractive, impressive, or desirable, but another person may look at you and recognize something much more profound. They may recognize the way you become quiet when something matters deeply to you. They may recognize the strength behind your calmness. They may notice that you carry certain experiences without constantly talking about them. That person isn't simply looking at your appearance, they're paying attention to your existence. And this becomes especially important when other people start talking about you. Imagine someone says, "You look like this person," or compares your appearance to someone else. Maybe the comparison is harmless. Maybe it is intended to be funny, or perhaps it is deliberately cruel. But whatever the intention, it does not automatically tell the truth about you. Your soulmate, or the person who genuinely cares for you, is less likely to reduce you to a comparison because they have context. They know your story. They know the version of you that exists when the camera is off, when nobody is applauding, when you're tired, uncertain, disappointed, or vulnerable. That is where real intimacy begins. Because intimacy isn't simply being physically close to someone. Intimacy is being psychologically understood. It is the experience of realizing, this person sees things about me that I don't have to explain. And when someone reaches that level of understanding, your appearance becomes only one piece of a much larger picture. This is also why you should never allow a stranger's opinion to compete with the knowledge of someone who has genuinely experienced your character. A person who sees you for 30 seconds has an impression. A person who knows you deeply has evidence. There is a tremendous difference. And psychologically, this matters because human beings have a tendency to internalize repeated judgments. If enough people tell you that you're not attractive enough, not interesting enough, not desirable enough, or somehow inferior to someone else, eventually the mind can begin treating those statements as facts. But repetition does not create truth. A lie repeated 100 times remains a lie, and your value cannot be measured by the number of people who understand it. Perhaps the greatest mistake you can make is trying to become visually acceptable to everyone while becoming emotionally disconnected from yourself. You don't need to win every comparison. You don't need to prove that you're better looking than somebody else. You don't need to convince everyone that you're worthy of love. The right person isn't conducting a competition. They're discovering a connection. And that connection is built through recognition. Recognition of your mind, your values, your humor, your wounds, your strength, your growth, and the unique way you move through life. So if someone has been talking about your appearance, don't let their words pull you into insecurity. Ask yourself something more powerful. Who actually knows me? Because the person who truly knows you will never need to reduce you to a face, a body, or a comparison. They will see the whole person. And when you learn to see yourself that way too, you become much harder to manipulate, much harder to shame, and far less dependent on outside approval. The deepest connection begins when someone stops looking at you and starts seeing you. Now let's go one level deeper, because the most dangerous part of gossip is not always what people say. It is what happens when a simple observation becomes a story, and then the story becomes a supposed truth. Someone notices something about you. Maybe you've changed your appearance. Maybe you carry yourself differently. Maybe you resemble someone they know. And instead of leaving that observation where it belongs, they add interpretation, emotion, exaggeration, and eventually judgment. That's how narratives are created. And human beings are incredibly vulnerable to narratives because the mind hates uncertainty. When we don't know the complete story, we instinctively fill in the gaps. We create explanations. We connect unrelated details. We take a small piece of information and construct an entire picture around it. Psychologically, this is one reason gossip spreads so easily. A person rarely says, "I don't know." Instead, they say, "I think I know what is happening." And that difference is enormous. Because the moment someone believes they understand you, they can begin speaking about you with confidence, even when their understanding is completely wrong. Maybe someone is telling people that you look like another person. Maybe they're exaggerating similarities. Maybe they're using your appearance to create a joke, a comparison, or even a form of humiliation. But remember this: the description someone gives of you is not necessarily a description of reality. It is a description filtered through their own perception. And sometimes that perception is influenced by jealousy, insecurity, competition, resentment, attraction, or the simple desire to have something interesting to say. This is why mature people don't react to every rumor. They investigate before they conclude. They observe before they judge. They ask questions before they build a narrative. And that principle applies not only to gossip, but to relationships, family, friendships, and even the way you interpret yourself. Because you can become your own gossip. You can repeat negative stories about yourself in your own mind. "I'm not attractive enough. Everyone notices my flaws. Someone else looks better than me. They probably don't really want me." Notice what happens when you repeat those statements often enough. Eventually you stop questioning them. They become part of your internal identity. That's the psychological trap. A story becomes a belief. A belief influences your behavior. Your behavior creates experiences. And then those experiences appear to confirm the original belief. That's how perception can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So when somebody tries to define you through a comparison, don't automatically fight them. Sometimes fighting a narrative gives it even more power. Instead, become grounded in reality. Ask, what do I actually know? What evidence do I have? Who is speaking? What might they gain from this story? And most importantly, does this information deserve space in my mind? Because not every statement deserves your emotional energy. You don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. You don't have to defend yourself against every opinion. You don't have to correct every person who misunderstands you. There is enormous strength in discernment, and this becomes especially important when relationships are involved. If someone genuinely cares about you, they may hear things about you, but they will not automatically accept them as truth. They will consider the source. They will compare the story with the person they actually know. That is what emotional maturity looks like. Because someone who truly knows you understands that human beings are more complicated than descriptions. You are not a rumor. You are not somebody else's comparison. You are not the version of yourself that exists inside another person's imagination. You are a living, changing human being. And perhaps that's the lesson hidden inside all of this. Stop giving strangers the authority to write your identity. Let people talk if they choose to talk. Let them create their theories. Let them make their comparisons. Your responsibility is not to control their mouths. Your responsibility is to control what you allow their words to do inside you. Because the moment you stop letting someone else's narrative define your self-image, their power over you begins to disappear. They can tell a story about you, but only you decide whether that story becomes your identity. And this is where we need to become extremely honest about what comparison does to the human mind. Because sometimes a comparison is not merely an observation. Sometimes it becomes a psychological weapon. Someone says, "You look like this person." On the surface, it may sound harmless, but depending on the tone, timing, and intention, that statement can trigger something much deeper. Suddenly, you're not simply hearing an opinion about your appearance. You're evaluating yourself against someone else. And that is where insecurity begins to grow. Human beings naturally compare. We look sideways to understand where we stand. We compare our success, relationships, appearance, intelligence, possessions, and progress. Comparison can occasionally motivate us, but when it becomes the foundation of our identity, it becomes destructive. Because the moment your self-worth depends on being better than someone else, you have surrendered control of your confidence. There will always be someone more attractive, someone younger, someone wealthier, someone more successful, someone with a different body, different personality, different opportunities, or a different kind of charisma. If your confidence requires you to win every comparison, you will never experience peace. And sometimes people understand this instinctively. They know exactly what comparison can do. They mention another person's name. They point out a physical difference. They make a subtle comment about your appearance. They laugh and then say, "I'm only joking." But you feel the impact. You go home and think about it. You look in the mirror differently. You start questioning something you weren't questioning 5 minutes earlier. That's the power of suggestion. A single sentence can plant a question in your mind. And if you keep feeding that question with attention, it can become insecurity. But here's something you must understand. The fact that someone triggered your insecurity does not mean they discovered a truth about you. They may have simply discovered a sensitive area. There is a difference. If someone says something about your appearance and suddenly you feel inadequate, don't immediately conclude they must be right. Instead, pause. Ask yourself, why did that statement affect me so strongly? That question is far more powerful, because sometimes the pain isn't coming from the person's words. The words simply touched an old wound that was already there. Maybe you've spent years believing you had to look a certain way to be loved. Maybe you've been compared to siblings, friends, classmates, or former partners. Maybe someone once made you feel unattractive, and you carried that sentence into adulthood. Now another person makes a similar comment, and suddenly the old emotional pattern comes alive. That's not weakness. That's conditioning. And conditioning can be changed. You do not have to continue believing every conclusion your past taught you. This is where personal power begins. You stop asking, "How do they see me?" And you start asking, "How do I see myself? And is that perception grounded in truth?" Because your identity should not be negotiated every time somebody expresses an opinion. Your appearance can change, your body can change, your style can change, your age can change. But your fundamental worth does not rise and fall with those changes. And when you truly understand that, comparisons become less threatening. Someone can say you resemble another person, and you can simply think, that's their observation. Someone can prefer someone else's appearance, and you can think, that's their preference. Someone can criticize you, and you can evaluate whether there is anything useful in the criticism without allowing it to become a judgment against your entire existence. That is emotional strength. It doesn't mean you become arrogant. It means you become stable. You can hear an opinion without becoming an opinion. And perhaps this is what your soulmate recognizes about you. Not perfection, not some impossible standard of beauty, but the person underneath the insecurity, the person who is learning to stand securely in their own identity. Because genuine love doesn't require you to defeat everyone else. It requires you to stop abandoning yourself. So if someone has been comparing you, don't waste your life trying to prove that you're better. You don't need to win their game, you need to leave the game. The moment you stop competing for worth, you discover that your worth was never a competition in the first place. And now we come to something people often misunderstand: silence. When someone cares deeply about you, you may expect them to immediately speak, defend you, explain themselves, or reveal everything they know. But human emotions are rarely that simple. Sometimes silence is not indifference, sometimes it is observation, sometimes it is restraint. And sometimes it is the mind trying to understand something before the heart decides what to do with it. Imagine your soulmate hears someone talking about you. They hear a comparison about your appearance. They hear someone describe you in a way that doesn't match the person they know. What happens next? A mature person doesn't necessarily react immediately. They listen, they watch, they compare the story with reality, and that distinction matters. Because when somebody truly knows you, they have something gossip does not have: context. They have seen your expressions in different situations. They know how you behave when you're comfortable and how you behave when you're under pressure. They have experienced your kindness, your humor, your frustrations, your vulnerability, and your strength. So when somebody else offers a quick description of you, that person may think, that doesn't sound like the person I know. And instead of creating unnecessary conflict, they may remain quiet. This is where we need to challenge one of the most common assumptions in relationships, that silence always means lack of interest. It doesn't. Sometimes silence means uncertainty. Sometimes it means emotional self-control. Sometimes it means someone is waiting for the right moment. And sometimes, yes, silence can mean distance. The mature approach is not to romanticize every silence. The mature approach is to interpret behavior within context. That's important because emotional maturity means resisting the temptation to turn one unexplained action into an entire story. Your mind wants certainty. If someone doesn't call, you may think, they don't care. If someone doesn't defend you, you may think, they're against me. If someone hears gossip and remains quiet, you may think, they believe it. But you don't actually know. And when you don't know, your mind can fill the empty space with fear. Psychologists often discuss how humans respond to ambiguity by creating explanations. The problem is that emotionally charged explanations are rarely neutral. When we're insecure, we tend to fill uncertainty with negative assumptions. That's why you have to learn the discipline of waiting for evidence. Don't let your imagination become your source of truth. If someone genuinely cares about you, their actions over time will reveal more than one moment of silence ever could. Watch patterns. Does this person respect you? Do they listen? Do they remember what matters to you? Do they show consistency? Do they treat you differently when other people are watching? Do their actions align with their words? These questions are far more revealing than trying to decode every pause, glance, or unexplained moment. And if someone is your soulmate in the deeper sense, not merely someone you intensely desire, but someone with whom you share genuine emotional compatibility, then eventually the relationship should move toward clarity. Healthy connection does not require endless guessing. It may contain mystery, but it should not depend on confusion. That is why you should never build your entire emotional world around signs and assumptions. Pay attention, yes. Trust your intuition, yes. But also respect reality, because there is a difference between intuition and projection. Intuition notices patterns. Projection fills in missing information with what you hope or fear is true. Maybe someone has heard things about you. Maybe they have noticed changes in you. Maybe they are thinking more deeply than they are speaking. But you don't need to chase every possibility. Let behavior reveal intention. Let time reveal character. Let consistency reveal commitment. And most importantly, don't abandon your dignity simply because someone has not yet given you an answer. You can care about someone without losing yourself. You can remain open without becoming desperate. You can believe in connection without turning uncertainty into fantasy, because the person who truly belongs in your life will eventually bring clarity, not because they are perfect, but because genuine connection naturally moves toward honesty. So don't be afraid of silence. Listen to it. Observe what follows it. And let reality, not fear, tell you what it means. Sometimes silence hides a feeling, but only consistent action reveals the truth.